Ay, quoth Little John, had I but my own good staff here, it would pleasure me hugely to crack the knave's pate, though saucy badgered. I want it would be well for thee, and thee comb were cut. Thus he spoke slowly at first, for he was slow to move, but his breath gathered headway like a great stone rolling down a hill, so that at the end he was full of anger. Then Eric Lincoln laughed aloud. Well spoken for one who fears to meet me fairly, man to man, said he. So seest thou twine on self, and if thou puttest foot upon these broads, I will make the saucy tongue rattle within thy teeth. Now, quoth Little John, is there never a man here that will let me a good stout staff till I try the mettle of yon fellow? At this, half a score reached him their staves, and he took the stoutest and heaviest of them all. Then looking up and down the cudgel, he said, Now I have in my hand but a splint of wood, a barely strew, as it were. Yet I trow it will have to serve me so. Here goeth. Upon he came the cudgel upon the stand, and, leaping lightly after it, snatched it up and his hand again. Then each man stood in his place, and measured the other with fell looks, until he that directly the spot cried, Play! At this they stepped forth, and each grasping his staff tightly in the middle. Then those that stood around saw the stoutest game of quarterstaff that e'er Nottingham town beheld. At first, Eric Lincoln thought that he would gain and easily advantage, so he came forth as if he would say, Watch, good people, how that I crave you his cordially right speedily. But he presently found it to be not such speedy matter. Right deftly he struck, and with great skill of fence. But he had found his match in Little John. Once, twice, thrice he struck, and 3 times Little John turned the blows to the left hand and to the right. And then, quickly, with a dainty back-handed blow, he rapped Eric beneath his guard, and so strongly that it made his head ring again. Then Eric stepped back to gather his wits, while a great shout went up, and all were glad that Nottingham had cracked Lincoln's crown, and thus ended the first bout of the game. Then presently the director of the sport cried, Play! And they came together again. But now Eric played warily, for he found his man was of good right mettle, and also he had no sweet memory of the blow that he had gotten. So his both never Little John nor the Lincoln man caught a stroke within his guard. Then after a while they parted again, and this made the second bout. Then for the 3rd time they came together, and at first Eric strove to be wary, as he had been before, but growing mad at finding himself so foiled, he lost his wits and began to rain blows so fiercely and so fast that they rattled like hail on penthouse roof, but in spite of all he did not reach within Little John's guard. Then, at least, Little John saw his chance and seized it right cleverly. Once more, with a quick blow, he reaped Eric beside the head, and ere he could regain himself, Little John splitted his right hand down to his left, and with a swelling blow smoothed the other so sorely upon the crown that down he fell as though he had never moved again. Then the people shouted so loud that folk came running from all about to see what was to ado, while Little John leaped down from the stand and gave the staff back to him that had lent it to him. And thus ended the famous bout between Little John and Erigo Lincoln of great renown. But now the time had come when those who were to shoot with the longbow were to take their place, so the people began flocking to the butts within the shooting was to be. Near the target in a good place sat the sheriff upon his racing dames, with many gentlefolk around him. When the archers had taken their place, the herald came forward and proclaimed the rules of the game, and how each should shoot 3 shots, and to him that should shoot the best, the prize of the 2 fat steers was to belong. A score of brave shots were gathered there, and among them some of the knees at the longbow in Lincoln and Nottinghamshire, and among them Little John stood taller than all the rest. "Who is yon stranger clad all in scarlet?" said someone, and others answered, "It is he that hath it but nose so stoutly cracked the crown of Erigo Lincoln." Thus the people talked among themselves until at least it reached even the sheriff's ears. And now each man stepped forward and shot in turn. But though each shot well, Little John was at the best of all, for 3 times he struck the cloud, and once only the length of a barleycorn from the centre. "Hey for the tall archer!" shouted the crowd, and some among them shouted, "Hey for Reynold Greenleaf!" For this was the name that Little John had called himself that day. Then the sheriff stepped down from the raised seat and came to where the archers stood, while all doffed their caps that saw him coming. He looked keenly at Little John, but did not know him, though he said, after a while, "How now, good fellow? Methinks there is that about my face that I have seen ere while." "Mayhap it may be so," quoth Little John, "for often have I seen your worship." And as he spoke he looked steadily into the sheriff's eyes, so that the latter did not suspect who he was. "A brave battle art thou, good friend," said the sheriff, "and I hear that thou hast well upheld the skills of Nottinghamshire against that of Lincoln this day. What may be thy name, good fellow?" "Men do call me Reynold Greenleaf, your worship," said Little John, and the old ballads that tell of this add, "So in truth was he a green leaf, but of what manners of tree the sheriff wotten not." "Now, Reynold Greenleaf," quoth the sheriff, "thou art the finest hand at the longbow that my eyes ever beheld, next to that the false knave Robin Hood, from whose wide heaven forfed me. Wilt thou join my service, good fellow? Thou shalt be paid right well. For 3 suits of clothes shalt you have a year, with good food and such ale as thou canst drink. And besides this, I will pay thee 40 marks each Michelin mestige. Then here stand I a free man, and right gladly will I enter the household," said Little John, for he thought he might find himself its merry yeast, should he enter the sheriff's service. "Fairly hast thou won the fat steers," said the sheriff, "and hereunto I will add a butt of good match beer, for joy of having gotten such a man, for I won't thou shootest as fair as a staff as Robin Hood himself." "Then," said Little John, "for joy of having gotten myself into thy service, I will give fat steers and bow ale to all these good folk, to make the merry withal. At this arose a great shout, many casting their caps aloft for joy of the gift. Then some built great fires and roasted the steers, and others broached the butt of ale, which with all made themselves merry. Then, when they had eaten and drunk as much as they could, and when the day faded and the great moon arose, all red and round over the stripes and towers of Nottingham town, they joined hands and danced around the fires to the music of bagpipes and harps. But long before this merrymaking had begun, the sheriff and his new servant, Reynold Greenleaf, were in the castle of Nottingham.